Okay, so you're here because you really want to understand social anxiety,
Yeah.
right? It's something that so many people struggle with, and it's way more than just being a little shy.
Absolutely it is.
It can be a really huge fear of like being watched and judged by other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so today, in this deep dive, we are going to try to help you understand it, spot it, and figure out some strategies to manage it effectively so you can still thrive.
Yeah, and it's something that, you've probably encountered yourself or know someone who has because the stats are actually pretty surprising.
Yeah.
About 12% of people in the US experience social anxiety at some point in their lives.
Wow.
And in any given year, about 7% of adults are dealing with it.
It's a really common thing.
Yeah, it's widespread. And that's why we really wanted to do this deep dive.
For sure. Well, let's just jump right in, shall we?
Hmm.
At its core, social anxiety is really this deep-rooted fear of being negatively evaluated by others. Right?
Yeah.
It's that worry that people are judging you, criticizing you, or even in the worst case scenario, like humiliating you. And it's not just those big high pressure moments that can trigger this for people, right?
Right.
Like I know a lot of our sources pointed out that even everyday things can set it off, like walking to a crowded room, giving a presentation at work, making small talk at a party, heck, even just eating in public or using a public restroom.
Oh, absolutely. I think those small everyday things are, for a lot of people, even worse than the big things
Really?
because you just don't expect it, right?
Yeah.
And so it can really catch you off guard. And that's kind of what separates it, from just being shy. Because
Right.
if you're just shy, it's not debilitating. It's not affecting your everyday life. This is something that, because of its intensity and how often it happens, really disrupts your life. It could be your relationships, your work, your studies,
Absolutely.
and that's when it becomes a problem.
So it sounds like you're saying this isn't just a fleeting feeling of shyness. It can really stick around.
Yeah, and unfortunately it can. I mean, if it's not addressed, it can last for 6 months or more, and in some cases, even years.
Wow. So really the key here is to understand it so you can recognize it and then start to do something about it.
Right.
So how do you recognize it? What are the telltale signs that what you're experiencing or what someone else might be experiencing is maybe something more serious than just those, typical nerves that we all get sometimes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the science can really be divided into two categories, psychological and physical.
Okay.
The psychological symptoms are things like, really intense fear or anxiety that just seems completely out of proportion to the actual situation. And then there's this constant worry about how you're coming across to other people.
Oh, yeah.
Are they judging me? Are they criticizing me? Are they going to humiliate me? You might feel really self-conscious, like all eyes are on you, even if they're not. And sometimes even after a social situation, people with social anxiety will find themselves replaying those encounters in their heads over and over and over again,
Huh.
really analyzing and kind of picking apart every little thing they think they did wrong.
And that sounds exhausting.
Yeah. It is. It is exhausting. Absolutely.
And then on top of that, you get the physical reactions, right? I mean, I'm sure our bodies can really go into overdrive when we're feeling this kind of anxiety.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
You can experience a rapid heartbeat, sweating, trembling, your face might flush, you might blush, you might even have an upset stomach, nausea, dizziness. Some people even experience difficulty breathing. Their muscles tense up, their mind goes blank, and it becomes difficult to speak or make eye contact.
Wow, that's a whole lot going on.
Yeah, it
Ugh.
is. And it's interesting because sometimes people will develop these what are called safety behaviors to try to cope.
Oh, interesting.
Things like avoiding eye contact, or not speaking up in groups.
Right.
But these behaviors, although they might make you feel better in the moment, actually can prevent you from overcoming the anxiety in the long run.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense, right?
It does. It does. It's kind of like you're not really facing your fears head on. And that can actually just kind of perpetuate the cycle.
Right. So we've painted a pretty clear picture, I think, of what social anxiety is and how it can manifest. What about managing it?
Yeah.
Like, what are some effective ways to actually start getting a handle on this and feeling better?
Well, one of the most effective approaches is cognitive behavioral therapy.
CBT.
CBT, exactly. And this is where you'll work with a therapist to identify and challenge those negative thought patterns and behaviors that are contributing to your anxiety.
Right.
So it's really about understanding how your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions are all connected, and then learning to kind of look at those negative thoughts through a more balanced and realistic lens.
So before we get to CBT, though, I mean, is there anything that people can start doing on their own to manage this? Like some self-help strategies?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is actively challenge those negative thoughts when they come up.
How do you do that?
Well, those automatic negative thoughts, those ANTs, when they pop into your head, everybody's staring at me, I'm going to mess this up. Really question them.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what's the actual evidence for this thought? What's the worst that could realistically happen? And then try to reframe those thoughts in a more balanced way.
Okay.
And then there are things like mindfulness and deep breathing, like the 4-7-8-8. Have you heard of that one?
I have, but refresh my memory.
Yeah. So you breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 7, and exhale for 8. These techniques can be super helpful in just calming your nervous system down when you're feeling anxious.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And then another strategy that's really helpful is gradual exposure.
What does that mean?
So this involves slowly and systematically, facing those social situations that are triggering that anxiety.
Okay.
You start with the ones that are less challenging and gradually work your way up to the more difficult ones. Another tip is when you're actually in those social situations, try to shift your focus outward. So instead of focusing on yourself and your own anxiety, really concentrate on what other people are saying. Listen actively, ask questions. This can take some of the pressure off of you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then, just practicing your social skills, like striking up conversations, working on your nonverbal communication. These things can also help to build your confidence over time.
It sounds like all of this is building up to something.
Absolutely.
Like it's not just about managing the anxiety, right?
Yeah.
It's about thriving in your life.
Exactly. Thriving with social anxiety means moving beyond just coping and actually actively pursuing the things that are important to you. So, cultivate self-compassion, acceptance, be kind to yourself, acknowledge that this is a journey,
Yeah.
focus on your strengths, your values, and engage in activities that really align with those. And finding that balance, that sweet spot between social connection and alone time,
Yeah.
so important. Really celebrating those small victories, those small steps forward you make, it's huge. I've seen so many people who've had success with things like stopping those negative thoughts and replacing them with positive affirmations
Nice.
and gradually exposing themselves to the things they fear. While using those CBT techniques, it really makes a difference.
That's really encouraging to hear. What happens, though, if this isn't addressed? Like, what could be the long-term impact of social anxiety if somebody doesn't do anything about it?
Well, unfortunately, if social anxiety is left untreated, it can have a really significant impact on your life. It can lead to, lower educational attainment, difficulties in your career, social isolation, loneliness. It can really affect your relationships.
Wow.
And it can also affect your self-esteem. You might struggle with feeling inadequate, not being assertive, having that constant negative self-talk.
And I imagine this can even impact physical health too, right?
It can. Chronic stress can really take a toll on the body. It can weaken your immune system, make you more susceptible to illness.
Right.
And then there's also an increased risk of developing other mental health conditions like depression or substance abuse. And in very serious cases, it can even contribute to thoughts of suicide. But, it's so important to remember that these outcomes are not inevitable. There is help available, and there is hope.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point, right? Like there are resources. So where can people turn to for support if they're feeling overwhelmed by all of this?
Yeah, well, seeking professional help is a really great first step. Talking to a therapist, a counselor, a psychiatrist, they can help you create a treatment plan that's tailored to your specific needs. And they might recommend things like CBT or, in some cases, medication.
Right.
Support groups are also incredibly valuable. There are both online and in-person support groups where you can connect with other people who understand what you're going through. And there are some amazing organizations out there that are dedicated to helping people with social anxiety. The Social Anxiety Association, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, or ADAA, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. They all offer a ton of information and resources. And the National Social Anxiety Center actually has a directory where you can find CBT specialists in your area.
That's fantastic. So really, I think the key takeaway here is that social anxiety can be a significant challenge, but it is manageable
It is.
with understanding, effective strategies, and the right support.
Exactly. And what I would really encourage you to do now is to think about which of these strategies resonated most with you, and then take that first step, even a small one, towards facing your fears. Because, even those small intentional actions can lead to really significant positive change in your life, and they can help you to live a more engaged and fulfilling life.
And Maybe exploring one of those organizations we talked about could be that next step.
Absolutely. Reaching out for help is a sign of strength, and it can really make a world of difference.
Great advice. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.